I'm Andrew Clavin, and this is my new story, Another Kingdom, performed by Michael Knowles. So far on Another Kingdom, Hollywood nobody Austin Lively has been transported from Los Angeles to the sword and sorcery land of Galiana, where he's beaten and accused of murdering a woman in a locked room. But before he can be taken from the castle dungeon to stand trial, he finds himself just as suddenly back in L.A. While being nursed back to health by his friends Skylar Cohen and Jane Janeway, he runs an internet search for Galiana and finds that it's a country in a novel called Another Kingdom, a novel he may have read. Now, Episode 3.
My hunting blood was up now. Something weird had happened to me. Something very weird. Mega weird. The hallucination or dream or whatever it was, the head wound, and now a novel with the place names Galiana and Eastrom in it, just like in the dream. It felt like I was close to finding an explanation for my experience. Close, and yet impossibly far, because I couldn't imagine what explanation there could be. But whatever it was, I wanted to find out. Needed to. Another Kingdom by Ellen Evermore. I needed to get home. I used my Orgo rideshare app to call for a car. Then, moving slowly, like an old man, I swung my feet down onto the floor. I found my shoes, slipped them on. I tried to stand, but the room began tossing and tilting again. I sat back on the bed hard, my stomach dropping. I stayed there a few moments, drawing deep breaths. I knew I must have a concussion. I knew I ought to go to a doctor, or at least lie back down and rest. It was awfully tempting to think of staying here for a few more hours, even a day or two. Jane would sit with me sometimes. She would feed me soup. Skylar couldn't hang around forever. I pushed myself up and staggered from the room. I heard voices as I came down the hallway toward the front door. I passed Jane's home office and peeked in. The room was empty. The lights were out. She was gone. I was disappointed. The voices were coming from the living room up ahead. I continued down the hall and went in there. It was an elegant, colorful room. A wagon wheel chandelier hung down from a dark wooden beam ceiling. The sofa and stuffed chairs below were bright sherbet colors, red and green. Everything was arranged around a tall white fireplace. High, arched windows made the space airy and light. The television was on. That's where the voices were coming from. Some daytime talk show, loud women and lots of applause. At first, I thought there was no one watching, but then I saw Skylar. I saw the red top of her head anyway. She was splayed inharmoniously in the armchair right in front of me, her feet on the ottoman. One hand holding a beer balanced on her belly button, bare where her black t-shirt didn't quite meet her black leggings. She had her back to me as she watched the program. She didn't look around when I stepped into the open archway. I thought she didn't know I was there. Then she said, "Jane had to go to the big house." The big house, that was where Alexis Merriweather and David Thune usually lived when they were in town. Jane had shown me pictures of it. A massive estate you could have seen from the moon. "She told me to make you soup if you woke up," Skylar said. "That's all right," I said. "I'm not hungry. I called a car." "Good, because I'm not making you any fucking soup." I smiled. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I felt for her. I started to sidle away toward the door. "Why don't you make your move, you dumb shit?" she asked me. "You can see she loves you." Well, that made me pause. I searched for an answer, a true answer, but I didn't know what the answer was. I wasn't sure how I felt, I guess. And you don't make a move on Jane Janeway unless you're ready, unless you're sure. But before I could say even that, Skylar said, "Christ's sweet sake, Austin, a girl like that, she'd serve you all her fucking days. Isn't that what men want?" I felt the sting. Was I so selfish? Of course. But somehow I managed not to say, "Hey, it's what you want too, isn't it? You're obviously crazy about her." "You're not man enough, that's your problem," she said. That hurt too, because I suspected it might be so. And on another day I might have barked back, "Neither are you if it comes down to it." But somehow I managed not to say that either. She swigged her beer. "You're just another wannabe artiste counting the days until you sell out and get a job." Wow, that was merciless. Jesus. But even now, I felt for her. Even now, I manage not to say, "Well, what the hell are you then?" Skylar belched. "You know what?" she said to the TV screen. "In the old fairy tales, you know how the beautiful princess gets the handsome prince? And people read that shit, and they think, well, why doesn't that happen to me? You know why? You know why it doesn't? Because they're not princesses. They're not princes, that's why. They're just messed up freaks who want the world to make believe they're beautiful and give them a happy ending they haven't earned. And that's you, Austin. You're not what you want to be. You're not who you ought to be. And you're not what Jane deserves. So go fuck yourself, all right?" I was reeling from the blows, but I was swamped with pity for her as well. Because I knew it wasn't just me she was talking about. It was her too. Maybe it was the whole stupid wannabe city. We're all so lost here, all of us. Wobbly and sick, I moved slowly out of the archway to her chair and stood above her, looking down. She lifted her angry cherub face to me. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glassy. "Don't pat yourself on the back for being kind to me," she said. "I can hear what you're thinking." I reached down and lifted her free hand off the chair arm. I raised it to my lips and kissed it. "Thank you for helping me back at Hitchcock's, Guy. You're a good friend." "If you don't let go of my hand right now, I'm going to use it to rip your fucking heart out." My apartment was an attic space in a charmless complex of concrete towers. Its sole redeeming feature was a window near my writing desk that looked out on the street. From there, I could see the spillover crowd in the parking lot and back of the corner bar, the No Hole. Come Saturday night, if someone out there screamed or broke a bottle, I could look down and check on the noise and watch a couple of drunken louts shoving one another before they wandered off home. Other than that, it was 2 small rooms with aggressively low ceilings. The bedroom was so small that when I unfolded the sofa into a futon, there was no space to walk around it on either side. The living room/kitchenette, where the precious window was filled by the writing desk and a couple of chairs. I set my laptop up on the table. I was raring to start my search, but before I could, I had to sit and rest a moment, leaning my elbow on the table, squeezing my eyes shut with my hand. When the concussion nausea passed, I went to work. I searched my computer for the title, Another Kingdom. Nothing. Then for the author, Ellen Evermore. Nothing again. I sat and stared at the screen, frustrated. I was beginning to doubt myself. Maybe I hadn't read the book for Mythos. Maybe I'd heard the word Galliana somewhere else. In a desperation move, I tried the computer's trash files. And there it was. A page I'd discarded. Another Kingdom. I opened it. It was coverage, all right. Or, that is, it was the beginning of a coverage report I hadn't finished. There was nothing there but the company form, the lines you fill out before you write your outline in your review. Another Kingdom. Form, novel. Genre, fantasy. Author, Ellen Evermore. Coverage, Austin Lively. Submitted to, Candy Fillican. Submitted by, Sean Gunther. Plotline, murder, intrigue, betrayal, and love all come into play as conspirators in the court of Castle Eastrom fight for power in the new Republic of Galliana. List of characters. Queen Elinda, the exiled Queen of Galliana. Emperor Anastasius, Lord of the 11 Lands, betrothed to Queen Elinda. Lord Iron Netherdale, head of the High Council of the New Republic. Sir Aravist Tem, captain of the Eastrom Castle Guard. Lady Betharay Netherdale, Lord Iron's wife, one-time lady-in-waiting to Queen Elinda. Lady Kata Palav, Lady Betharay's friend, one-time, that was it. 1 page. No plot outline, no report. The abrupt ending. Nothing else. Why hadn't I finished it? I checked the document's date. It had been created 3 months ago. It was just starting summer then. I tried to think back. Something stirred in my memory. Candy had sent me an e-book as part of the usual package. I'd started reading it, but before I could finish, something happened. I couldn't remember what. I searched for the title in my email files. Found it, an email from Candy. Austin, hope this catches you before you read Another Kingdom. The submission has been withdrawn, so we don't have to bother with it. Sorry, CF. I didn't remember what I'd done with the book after that, but I'd almost surely deleted it. I deleted all of the books after I'd read them. Why wouldn't I? I stood up from the desk. The room did a slow, sickening roll around me. I cursed. I had to reach out and grab the back of an armchair so I could lower myself into it, close my eyes, rest, Sitting there like that, I tried to remember more about the book, but there was nothing. Nothing, certainly, that would explain what had happened to me in the Edison building. Maybe Candy still had a copy, I thought. Doubtful after 3 months, but she might. Or she might remember something about it. Or something about the man who had submitted it, Sean Gunther. That name sounded familiar, too. If I hadn't felt so lousy, I might have been able to remember. Taking a deep breath to steady myself, I worked my way out of the chair again, back to the desk again. I got my phone. I dialed Candy. I gazed out the window as I listened to the ringing on the other end of the line. That was the first time I saw the black Mustang. It was parked at the curb in the red no parking zone next to the no-hole lot. A racy old-school machine, jet black and shiny. I didn't take much notice of it. Not right away, not yet. It was just something to gaze at idly while I waited for Ken, Candy's assistant, to answer the phone. I did notice the driver, though. Kind of a strange-looking guy, or a strange-looking girl, I wasn't actually sure which. He or she had boy-cut blonde hair, but a small round face with kittenish female features. He had a narrow, girly body from what I could see of it, but a bared bicep on his visible arm with muscles that had to be a man's. Call her a him, then, for convenience sake. That was all I took in before Ken picked up the line. He said he'd see if he could find Candy, which meant he'd ask her if she thought I was worth speaking to. I guess I was. I was still looking down at the driver of the Mustang when she came on the line. "Austin?" she said curtly. I was just a reader after all. I'd already had my weekly meeting. What did I want now? "Is there a problem with the assignments?" "No, look, I'm sorry to bother you, Candy," I said. I turned away from the window to focus. I already had my story ready. I was just checking my records, and I found an unfinished report for a book called Another Kingdom. I was worried I hadn't completed the assignment. Do you remember that one? "Gee, nope. I'm sure if it was important, I'd have asked for it." "It was submitted by a guy named Sean Gunther," I said. Oh yeah, sure. He's a pal of Henry's." Henry Quint was the head of Mythos, Candy's boss. "He was like some big writer back in the day, like 1,000,000 years ago or something." As she went on talking, I searched Gunther's name on my laptop. "Henry talks about him a lot. I guess he wrote this one famous novel at some point and he was like the flavor of the month. Then he did that Hollywood thing they do, you know, where he came out here hoping to score the big bucks, and he took a lot of meetings and people fawned over him, and it was all sweet and dreamy except the years went by and nothing he wrote got made, and then people stopped hiring him. So by the time he decided to sit down and write something again, his glory days were over. Nobody cared anymore what he did." Gunther's Wikipedia entry came up on the screen. There was his picture. A noble countenance haloed by a leonine mane of silver-white hair. His first novel, 1,000 pages of self-referential drivel, had been shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize 30 years ago. Candy went on. "He sent this Another Kingdom thing to Henry because he wanted to adapt it for the movies. It was supposed to be his big comeback or whatever. It was a mercy read, basically. Henry was just being nice to a friend." "Right. Only you pulled it before I finished the coverage, right?" Right. Now I remember. Gunther got cold feet about the whole thing and decided he didn't want to go through with it. I think the guy's basically an old drunk. You know, Henry humors him because they were friends back when dinosaurs roamed the earth." "You don't still have a copy of that book around, do you?" "Nah, why?" Again, I had my story prepared. When I stumbled on the coverage, I remember how much I liked what I read. I was thinking if Gunther doesn't want to do anything with it, maybe I would. "You don't happen to have his contacts, do you? I'd like to ask him if he'd let me read it again." "I'll have Ken check with Gunther and get permission to send you his info," Candy said. I thanked her and hung up. I turned back to the window, glanced out, thinking. And there was the black Mustang. The kittenish man behind the wheel looked away quickly, as if I'd almost caught him staring up at me. What the hell, I thought. Was he watching my apartment? But before I could think much more about it, my phone buzzed again. A video call this time. My kid sister, Riley. In every family drama, each person has a role to play. In my family, my older brother Richard was the big success, my parents' pride and joy. Me? Well, I guess I was the misguided wastrel, frittering away my life in Hollywood until I came to my senses and got a real job or went back to school. Riley, though, she was the lost sheep, the lost cause. No one really had any hope for her future, not even me, and I loved her like crazy. I took her call on my computer so I could see her on the bigger screen. There she was, as she almost always was when she called me, lying tummy down on her unmade bed, Her legs bent at the knees so that her tiny feet in their ankle socks waggled up in the air behind her. She was only 3 years younger than I was, but she seemed a childlike creature, small with straw-yellow hair she wore in braided pigtails, and a round, cute face that got all pinched and wrinkled when she was upset, like a baby's face when she's about to cry. Her body was more a girl's body than a woman's, with no shape to speak of, and she always wore tattered jeans and baggy t-shirts that gave her a gamine charm. I couldn't look at her without wanting to feed her and tuck her into bed, as I had actually done for her sometimes when she was younger and my Professor Mom and Professor Dad couldn't be bothered to do the parenting. Now, whenever I heard from her, I worried it was trouble. And a lot of times it was. The same girlish vulnerability I found endearing in her was a magnet to the sort of men who wanted to use her and mistreat her, which, sadly enough, seemed to be just the sort of men she was attracted to. She always seemed to have one of these nasty creeps hanging around her. And I was the one who got the weepy phone call after he left and before his successor moved in. "Hey," I said. "What happened to your head?" she asked. "Nothing. I tripped on the curb and bumped it. It looks worse than it is. I'm fine. What's wrong with you?" "Who said anything was wrong?" "You only call me when something's wrong." "That's so untrue." "Okay, how's everything?" "Everything sucks," she said. And she kicked one little foot pettishly into the mattress. "I hate our parents." "Which means you're out of money again and they won't give you any." "No, that's such a shitty thing to say, Austin." I rolled my eyes. "All right, yes," she said. "But it's still shitty to say." Riley lived up north near our parents. She had a job, or a sort of job, as an actress at the Happy Town theme park near Walnut Creek. In summer, she played a farm girl there, welcoming kids to the petting zoo while the dad stole glances at the back of her cut-off jeans. In autumn, now, she was a ghoul in the funhouse, jumping out at passers-by. In winter, she waited tables. But whatever the time of year, Happy Town was only weekend work, meant to supplement her true vocation. Riley was a video maker. She recorded and starred in a series of videos called Ouroboros, Dark Dreams of Reality. In the videos, she lay on her unmade bed, just as she was doing now, except with a circular design framing her. She looked into the camera on her phone and spun conspiracy theories out of stories she'd read online. These theories involved aliens from outer space and an international cabal of plotters, variously called the Illuminati or the Templars. The Templars were helping the aliens take over the Earth. They, the Templars, or maybe the aliens, I'm not sure, thought alien government would be better for us humans because the aliens had superior intelligence. But it was clear they wanted power for its own sake too, and that ultimately they meant to enslave us all. The theories, in short, were crazy and ridiculous, and though she explained them with a straight face, I could never tell. I'm not sure she could tell whether she was serious about any of it or not. Either way, for some reason, don't ask me why, people seemed to like her stuff. Her vids got tens of thousands of hits, hundreds of thousands sometimes. Enough viewers to win her site the sponsors and subscribers she needed to supplement her Happy Town money and help her make the rent. But somehow, for Riley, even that was never enough. Maybe it was the men or just her own recklessness, but she was constantly broke, constantly asking her parents for money. Most of the time they helped her out, if only to keep her from moving back in with them. But sometimes, "Who's the guy?" I asked her. Because when our parents refused to send cash, it was usually because they didn't like Riley's latest nightmare of a boyfriend. "It's not always about the guy," said Riley. Then she said, "His name is Marco." And she coyly twined her stockinged feet together and smiled at someone standing behind her camera. On cue, Marco entered the picture. He plopped down on the mattress beside her and gave her a smack on the backside, a gesture of ownership she clearly enjoyed. It made me wince. Plus, the guy looked like a drug dealer, assuming he wasn't something worse like a pimp or a hitman or a serial killer. He was long and sinewy with blue ink tats on his neck, chest, and arms, all of which were visible because he wasn't wearing a shirt. He looked aggressively good shirtless, too, with his washboard abs folded neatly into the enormous silver belt buckle at the front of his jeans. He had long, shaggy hair and long, vulpine features and olive skin like some brand of Latino. He smiled at me as he left his hand resting on Riley's bottom. It was a domineering and insinuating smile, a strong man to a weak man smile, and I have my hand on your sister's bottom smile. The bastard. "Austin, this is Marco. Marco, Austin," Riley said. "Isn't he cool?" she added fondly, rubbing her head against him as if she were a kitten. "Jesus, Riley," I said. Of course Mom and Dad won't give you money. What did you expect? It's not because of Marco. Of course it's because of Marco. Look at him. Marco smiled wider, showing me his white predatory teeth. Well, okay, they do hate him, Riley said affectionately. But it's the vids they're angry about. They say they're not going to help me anymore until I stop posting them. They say I'm embarrassing them. Well, I could believe that. My folks had worked their way out of a Midwestern nowhere. My father now held the prestigious Orozco Chair in Psychology at Berkeley. My mother was a professor of sociology there. They were covetous of their academic status and proud of their elegant intellectual friends. I'm sure it was difficult enough for them when people asked, "And what is your other son doing?" But Riley and her videos. It is because she is getting too close to the truth, Marco chimed in at this point. He had a deep, mellifluous voice with a fake-sounding Latin lover accent. He was the whole bad news package, all right. No wonder Riley adored him. Yeah, too close to the truth, I said. That must be it. Marco was a documentary filmmaker in Venezuela during the collapse, Riley said proudly. He saw my videos online and came to help me. I'll bet he did. We are very close to exposing the whole conspiracy now, my friend, he said. And he lifted his hand off my sister's butt long enough to indicate the books on the shelf on the wall behind them. There were books with purple bindings and yellow lettering, white bindings and rainbow lettering, and one enormous tome with scarlet leather binding and inlaid gold lettering. My experience as a reader told me these were the sorts of designs publishers reserved for nutty diatribes about UFOs and Templars and crystals and the like. We just need a little more time, Riley wheedled. If they would just give us enough to live on for a few more months, we'll be famous. Riley. Could you ask Richard for us, please? Richard won't give you money if Mom and Dad won't. But he'll argue with Mom and Dad if you ask him to. They love him and he loves you and you love me. That's how our family operates. I was about to ask, who do you love, Riley? But then Marco replaced his hand on her backside and gave me his toothy grin again, so that answered that. Riley rolled over and pressed the back of her head into Marco's bare belly. Please, Austin, she repeated. She stretched the words out as far as they would go. I looked at her, sprawled on her side with her t-shirt bunched up to expose her bare belly and her jeans torn to show the white flesh high on one thigh. I'll think about it, I said. I gestured toward Marco. Meanwhile, dump this clown. He's trash. Marco grinned even wider. The bastard. I broke the connection. I cooked myself some eggs, then lay down on the sofa and slept again. When I woke up, the light was fading from the small patch of sky visible from the bedroom window. I sat up. My dizziness was gone. My head felt better. My mind was clearer. I touched the bump on my head and it felt smaller, less sore. Maybe the worst effects of the concussion were passing. I picked my phone off the floor and checked my mail. Ken, the assistant, had sent me Sean Gunther's contact info, email, phone number, and home address. Charged up, on the hunt again, I went back into the living room. I sat down at my desk and began to write Gunther an email. But what should I say exactly? Dear Mr. Gunther, yesterday I was transported into an alternate reality and I was wondering, no. There was no way to explain this in email. I decided to phone him. He picked up on the third ring. A gruff voice. Yeah. Mr. Gunther? Yeah. My name is Austin Lively. Oh yeah. Come on over. He hung up. I took the phone from my ear and looked at it. I thought, okay, that was weird. I sat at my desk, pondering, gazing out the window. Then I noticed the black Mustang was still there. That was kind of weird too, wasn't it? The car just sitting in the no parking zone all this time. The driver with the girly kitten face and the big muscle man arm just sitting there. I wondered about it another second or two, then shrugged it off. The important thing was, I was getting somewhere now. Closer to the book, Another Kingdom. Closer to an explanation for what had happened to me. Maybe Sean Gunther had some of the answers. I got up to go. I grabbed my denim jacket off the back of a chair. I slipped it on as I walked to the apartment door. Then I walked out, and I let out a wild shout of horror. Oh no! Suddenly, 2 guards had me gripped by the arms and I was being hustled up the dungeon steps to face my trial for murder. It was a brutal shock. A hammer blow to the belly, knocking the air and life right out of me. Why hadn't it occurred to me I might walk through another door and find myself swept back into Galiana? Because shit like that doesn't happen, that's why. I still didn't really believe it had happened to me the first time, and to find myself back here, in manacles again, facing murder charges again. The jolt of despair was so sudden it was nearly crippling. Was I going nuts, or was this real? Why hadn't I gotten that brain scan while I had the chance? One of the guards gave me a rough shove. "Come on, let's go. Hurry up. Stop stalling." The man in the red vest walked ahead of us, leading the way. Sir Aravis Tem, the captain of the guard. Even in the whirl of hopelessness and confusion, I knew his name now. I remembered it from the character list in my computer. We reached the top of the stairs. We went down a short stone hallway, pushed through a heavy set of doors. I prayed that crossing the threshold would transport me back to Los Angeles and save me. No such luck. We came into a small chamber. A cohort of guards were waiting for us there, all with their swords drawn. Why? Then a sound reached me, and I understood. It was the sound of a mob just outside, an angry mob. People shouting, chanting, "Bring him out! Bring us the murderer! Murder! Conspiracy! We'll strangle him with his own guts!" I looked around wide-eyed at the guards surrounding me. I swallowed hard. Wait, are they screaming for me? No one answered. No one even looked my way. The guards focused only on Sir Aravis Tem. Sir Aravis said, "Keep him surrounded. Don't let him get at him. Let's go." "No, wait, I said. The captain pushed through the doors and the guards marched me out after him. "There he is! Let us at him! Murderer! Get out of our way!" Everything was chaos, noise and motion. I was in a courtyard, a square of sky above me, stone walls rising on every side. I was jostled hard. Rough faces, contorted and purple with murderous rage, lunged at me over the guards' shoulders. Hands reached for me, grabbed at me, clawed the space in front of my eyes. The mob's roar filled the air like the roar of a surging sea. Pushed and shoved, the cohort of guards veered and stumbled left and then right, carrying me with them. With my hands manacled behind me, I had to fight to keep my balance. I could barely see beyond backs and shoulders, angry faces and glimpses of the tossing sky. It occurred to me, in jumbled flashes of panicky thought, that I could die here, really die, right here in this ridiculous fairyland. I'd been smacked with the flat of a sword here, and the bruise was still on my head when I returned to L.A., so wouldn't I be dead in L.A. if I was torn to pieces by this mob or tried and condemned and executed? And what if, almost worse, what if I was sentenced to life in the dungeon? What if I never got a chance to pass through another doorway and could never return to my life at home? Would I rot away in my cell, chained to the wall, dying in this dream while I dreamed of my lost life in Hollywood? "Burn him! Draw and quarter him! Let us have him, murderer! We'll cut him to pieces!" The crowd kept roaring. The faces and hands kept trying to get at me. The guards kept shoving their way through, carrying me along with them. It wasn't far, thank God. The trip across the courtyard couldn't have been more than 20 yards. After a few terrifying moments, two massive dark wood doors loomed high above me, just ahead. The doors swung open as the guards fought their way to them. The mob charged us one last time. The guards stumbled into me. Hands reached. Contorted faces screamed. There were curses. There were clawing fingers. There were flashing silver blades. "Get back, you animals!" Then I was hurried through the doors, and the doors swung shut behind me with a boom. The guards sheathed their swords and stepped away from me. My hands still manacled, I bent forward, panting for breath. Then, slowly, I straightened. I looked up. I was in a small but majestic courtroom, lit by fire, by torches flaming from sconces and candles burning in the rims of chandeliers. In oaken boxes of tiered spectator benches to my left and right, lords and ladies and priestly types and who knows who else sat looking down at me. Their pitiless expressions flared and darkened in the shifting light and shadow. Behind them, wooden strips made chevrons on the yellow walls. Above them, shields and battle axes formed cornices beneath the dark wood ceilings. Like the eyes of the spectators, the murderous blades caught the orange fire glow and reflected it back to me. Straight ahead, at the end of a long, broad aisle, was a high judge's bench. It was an awful sight, towering almost to the rafters. A rampant red dragon was carved into the front of it, 6 feet tall at least. and seated at the top were two terrifying figures, the judges. They wore black robes, and their eyes burned red from the depths of the cowls that covered their heads and shadowed their faces. I took one look at them, and I knew I was doomed. Now 2 guards gripped my arms and marched me down the aisle between the spectators. They brought me to a railing under the high bench and left me there. I stood, manacled, blinking up at the judges. Sir Aravis Tem swaggered up beside me, stroking his neat black beard with one hand, the thumb of his other hand insouciantly hooked in his sword belt. "Lord Judges of the High Council," he said in a soldierly voice that echoed in the reaches of the ceiling, "I deliver the prisoner Austen Lively to be tried for the murder of Lady Catapalav." The room was deathly silent then. There was not even a curious murmur. The 2 judges way up there above me solemnly nodded their hooded heads. The one to the left spoke in the gravelly voice of an old man, though his face was hidden in shadow and I couldn't tell his age. "Summon Lord Netherdale," he said. Lord Iron Netherdale, head of the High Council of the New Republic. I remembered his name from the character list too, and even in my days of fear and confusion, it occurred to me now how bizarre that was. You know, that I should have read a name in a fantasy book, and that I should be here, in Galliana, wherever the hell that was. And that name should be called as if it were attached to a living man. A bell tolled. A massive bell tolling massively, sonorously, somewhere in some tower nearby, out in the courtyard. There was a shuffling sound, and I turned to see that everyone in the courtroom was standing, the judges and the pitiless lords and ladies and priests in the spectator benches, everyone. And in came Lord Iron. He entered from a doorway high up in the wall and moved briskly across a raised platform toward the bench. As he went, he smiled at someone in the audience, and pointed at someone else and smiled at yet another. A public man. A politician, just like the ones we have back home in reality. If I held any hope of getting justice here, it died right then and there, when I saw him. He was in his 50s, tall and substantial, straight-backed and broad-shouldered, fit and trim. He had a thick head of brown blonde hair and a handsome, confident countenance that went before him like the prow of a ship. I could see at a glance he was smart and schemy, the master of the place. Whatever happened here, it would be his doing or by his will. He was followed close behind by another man, a much smaller man, very short and very wizened, very thin. He wore a robe of deep indigo that flowed about his desiccated frame like liquid night. He had a face like a raisin with small, glittering eyes buried deep in the wrinkled flesh. A gray tuft of hair rose like a little wave up top. A gray tuft of beard hung limply from his chin. Lord Iron settled into his seat between the 2 other judges, and when he sat, all the others in the hall, the judges and the spectators, sat down as well. The little man in the indigo cape took up a place directly behind him, standing. "This tribunal is in session," Lord Iron said in a voice that was both relaxed and strong, casual and yet authoritative. He looked down at me from his great height. I felt his power over me, the power of life and death. It made my guts curdle. "Austen Lively," he said, and I hated to hear him speak my name. It was disorienting, unreal, as if my name should have been on the character list on my computer along with his. "You are charged with stabbing Lady Catapalav to death. How do you plead?" I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to admit that this was happening, that I was actually here, but what could I do? "I'm not guilty," I said as forcefully as I could. The little graybeard behind Lord Iron leaned forward and whispered into the Lord's ear. The Lord smiled knowingly and gave a little snort. My heart sank. Doomed. "Summon Lady Bethray to take the stand," he said. Lady Bethray. Yes, I remembered that name from the character list too, like Sir Aravist's name and Lord Iron's. And now she was coming here. How crazy was this? Really, what the fuck? Had I become a character in a novel? Everyone turned, and so I turned. I saw a small door set in the wall at the rear of the room behind the spectator's box. The door swung open, and out from the darkness within walked a woman into the firelight, a woman like no woman I had ever seen before. She took my breath away. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was beautiful, she really was. She was young, in her early 20s at most. She had lush, raven hair held in bangs on her brow by a silver tiara studded with gems. The rest of it spilled with heart-stopping abandon down the sides of her rose and ivory valentine of a face. Her lips were soft and rich, and her eyes were brilliant green. A golden chain with a round golden locket set off the grace and elegance of her throat. Her long gown of white and gold draped a shapely figure at once sensual and majestic. She was beautiful, no question. But I lived in L.A. I saw beautiful women all the time. It was more than that struck me about her. It was the grace with which she came down the aisle as if floating on air. It was the way she never turned, never glanced either left or right at the staring, murmuring spectators. It was the way she kept her hands clasped beneath her breasts in a position of such modesty and self-containment. Everything about her. It was all just so incredibly... what was the word? Womanly. So incredibly womanly. I watched her walk past me. I couldn't stop staring. Sir Aravis Tem opened a gate in the railing for her. She inclined her chin half an inch in thanks and passed through. I watched her as she climbed up the narrow stairway to the witness box beside the high bench, climbed so smoothly she almost seemed to levitate. She took her place in the box, stood there behind its low rail, erect, dignified, her hands still clasped before her. "The witness will state her name," Lord Iron said. "My name is Lady Bethray Netherdale," she answered. Her voice was like silver bells. "And your station?" "I am honored to be your wife, my lord." Lord Iron smiled blandly. "And it is my great pleasure that you are," he said. As the watching crowd tittered its approval, I thought, that's right. I remembered that. From the character list, she was Lord Iron's wife. A recent prize for him, I would have bet, considering what had to be the 30-year difference in their ages. "Before the fall of the Queen and the rise of the new Republic, did you have another station as well?" Lord Iron asked her. "I did, my lord. I was lady-in-waiting to Queen Elinda." "And in that capacity you served with Lady Katapalov, the victim in this case, did you not?" "Yes, my lord." Yes, I remembered this too. Lady Kata had been Lady Betharay's friend, which meant Lady Kata's death, her murder, must have really grieved this woman. I couldn't see any signs of grief on her face. Of course not, she was too poised, too seemingly serene. But I had to wonder, was she sorrowful enough to be angry, angry enough to want vengeance, vengeful enough to assume I was guilty, to actively try to condemn me here in her testimony? There was a brief pause as, once again, the wizened graybeard in the wizardly robe leaned forward and whispered in Lord Iron's ear. The politician's large head inclined in agreement. Then he said, "Lady Betharay, during the time you were lady-in-waiting, did you ever have occasion to witness Lady Kata in a secret meeting with a man?" "I did, my lord." "Would you describe that occasion?" Lady Betharay went on in her silvery voice, gazing straight ahead, never turning, her hands still clasped in front of her. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was radiant in her womanly dignity and modesty. "It happened one evening at the end of summer, just at twilight shortly before the fall of the Queen. I was doing my handiwork, sitting on the window seat of the ladies' chamber in the Queen's quarters in order to catch the last rays of the sun to see by. As the daylight failed, I put my work away in its basket. I was just preparing to leave when I happened to glance down into the hedge maze in the garden directly below me. I saw Lady Kata there. She was walking in the maze, moving toward its center." "You could identify her even in the fading light?" Lord Iron asked. "I could, my lord. There was still light enough, and I knew the lady well." "Very well. Go on." "I was curious as to what Lady Kata was doing in the maze at that hour, so I stood and watched for a few moments. She made her way to the center and sat on the stone bench in the statue garden there." "And then?" "And then she waited. And it got darker. And after a few minutes, when it was full night so that I could no longer make out anything of her but her shadow, a man approached her." "You saw him enter the maze?" "I did not, my lord," said Lady Betharay. She spoke into the air before her, looking neither to her husband nor anyone else. "It is my belief he had been standing in one of the maze's alcoves, hidden behind a statue. I remember it seemed to me as if a statue had come to life and approached her." Again, the little wizard guy hovering behind the bench whispered to Lord Iron, and again Lord Iron nodded. Please go on, Lady Bethuray. The man made his way to the center of the maze and joined Lady Cata in the statue garden, she said. And in what manner did she greet him? She, Lady Cata, leapt from the bench on which she was sitting and rushed into the man's arms. Even from where I was standing far below her, I saw a faint flush of pink tinge the ivory of Lady Bethuray's cheeks. It occurred to me somewhere in the back of my mind that I had never seen a woman blush like that before. Blush because she was speaking about romantic stuff, I mean. I had only read about women doing that in books, but here it was in real life, if real life is what this was. She embraced him, you mean? Lord Iron said. Embraced him passionately and then kissed him, my lord. Kissed him like a relative? No, my lord. They kissed as lovers kiss, and for a long time. The crowd murmured, and Lady Bethuray's blush deepened, and something about it, I don't know what, the old-fashioned ladylike modesty of it, I guess, I don't know. But whatever it was, I felt it pierce me through like a sword point, even here, even now. Lord Iron had one of those gavels without a handle, you know, that just fit in the palm. He banged it on the bench. Order! When the spectators had fallen silent, he turned back to his wife. Lady Bethuray, would you describe to this court your reaction to what you witnessed? I was quite startled, my lord. I was shocked. I had always known Lady Cata to be a woman of virtue and true religion. She was married to Lord Gaunt, who was still alive at that time. And though he was much older than she was and had been sick of late, I had always known Cata, Lady Cata, to be faithful to her vows. I had not expected this. And did you confront her about her infidelity? I did, my lord. I considered it my duty as a friend. I spoke to her in private the very next day. And can you describe that conversation? Lady Cata was in great distress, crying grievously. She begged me to say nothing to the Queen or to her husband, and yet she feared that she would be undone in any case. Undone, because? Lady Cata confessed to me, and now, for the first time, the lady faltered, lowering her eyes almost imperceptibly. Go on, my lady. She drew a breath and lifted her head, willing herself back to composure. Lady Cata confessed to me that she feared she was carrying her lover's child. You could hear that pass through the crowd like a bolt of electricity, the murmur moving from one end of the hall to the other. And she knew that it was her lover's child and not her husband's? Asked Lord Iron calmly. She did, my lord. Lord Gaunt had been grievously ill for many months, as everyone at court was aware. Lady Cata feared that when her condition became known she would face trial for adultery. And she would have, said Lord Iron. The wizard type behind him leaned in again to whisper, but he held up his hand to silence him and continued. Lady Bethuray, did Lady Cata confess to you the name of her lover? She did, my lord, the lady replied. It sounds crazy, I know, but to that point, I had been so hypnotized by her loveliness, so wrapped up in the narrative of her testimony, so completely convinced down to the bottom of my soul that that narrative had nothing to do with me, that it was only in the moment before she answered that I realized with horror what she was going to say. Until then, she had spoken almost without moving, her hands clasped before her, her eyes straight ahead. But now she turned her face, just a little, just enough, so that her piercing green eyes were directly on me. She said that her lover was Austin Lively. What? No, I shouted. I'd always wondered why people in courtroom dramas on TV shout out like that. It makes them look so bad. I always thought they would be smart enough to control themselves. It turns out you can't help it. It isn't true, I shouted, straining against my manacles as a nearby guard grabbed hold of me. I never touched her. I never met her. She isn't... I was about to say, she isn't even real in my world. But Lord Iron hammered his palm gavel against the bench and I caught myself. Order, he commanded. Thank you for your testimony, Lady Bethuray, he said then. You may step down. One more thing happened then. One more thing, I mean, to set my whirling mind whirling even faster. Lady Bethuray descended from the witness box, floating down the stairs as she had floated up them. She glided beneath the judge's bench to the railing. Sir Eravist opened the gate and she glided through. And just then, just as she was gliding past me, close to me, near enough to touch me, near enough so that I thought I caught a wild, yearning scent from her, like the scent of night blooming jasmine. She turned and faced me. She looked right into my eyes, gazed right into my eyes. And as I gawked back, my mind still reeling with horror and bewilderment, I couldn't have said just then what I saw. Just then I was too crazed to figure it out, but her gaze struck me like a broadside blow and an image came to life in my mind, a memory, more than a memory, a visceral flashback, her lips on mine, her soft shape against me. And in her eyes I saw that she loved me.
This has been Another Kingdom by Andrew Clavin, performed by Michael Knowles.